to say about Blair Witch Project. So this is a really notorious, polarizing movie that every horror fan has heard of, every movie fan has heard of, and I would assume a lot of just people in general have heard of it as well. It's a found footage movie from 1999, and the thing with this movie is it's very notorious because it was one of the first movies to be widely publicized and advertised and honestly just used through the internet to garner a ton of attention, because 1999, the internet was in its relatively early stages and certainly in its primitive days in comparison to where we're at now in 2021. But this movie, when it came out, garnered a shit ton of attention and was a very polarizing movie because at the time people were led to believe that it was real and that this was actual events and this was a real found footage documentary, if you will, because on these forums and things like that, you had the filmmakers pushing it as real events. And now in the coming years after, it was exposed, I guess, to be total fiction, which is no surprise. However, I feel like if you're watching this movie in 2021 as opposed to 1999 or 2000 or whatever, I'm not exactly sure the year when it was officially deemed fiction and everybody realized it, but I feel like at the time this movie was probably quite the spectacle, and I feel like it was highly regarded, and it is somewhat critically acclaimed. Horror fans probably view it as pretty overrated, which I can understand. But man, I feel like at the time, I would honestly have loved to be somebody like myself and a young adult horror fan in the year 1999, because I can't even imagine what that would be like seeing this in the theaters, because the big knock on this movie is there's no killer, there's no malevolent force that you actually see really in action, and there's pretty much no gore, right? There's one little blip of I don't even know what it was, excuse me, I feel like it was a tongue or something, I'm not sure, but there's no gore, there's no real moment where you see violence or a killer or anything really intimidating. But what I think what it is it's like attack on your senses, because as I was watching it, and I hope this doesn't come off as offensive, but I feel like if you were blind and you were just listening to a movie, I think this movie would be effective, honestly, because it's definitely an auditory movie to behold, I guess, or an experience. And there is a lot of tension in this movie based around the three characters in it, and the movie's shot on these cameras. I don't know what kind of cameras they are, but I think it was set in 1994, so they're using these not handheld cameras, but documentary level film cameras. And so it's got that grainy look to it. I think it's 4:3 as well. So another one of those things to kind of give it that added real raw guerrilla style feel. And I think that's definitely a cool touch. But the biggest parts of this movie that make it an effective thriller, I think, is the interactions between the characters. Because at first they're three kind of joking, somewhat seems to be decent, good friends, right? Just going out on a trip, excited to, try and unearth this urban legend about the Blair Witch in the woods of was it Burkittsville, Maryland or something. And then as it progresses, as you know, time passes on, when they're camping, things start to really take a turn, and you know, they start to question each other, and there's a lot of drama, and it gets really intense. You know, you've got a lot of screaming, a lot of, you know, it's just attack on your auditory senses, right? Or I guess your auditory sense, and all the tension is heard, not really seen, honestly, at all. I never really thought that there was anything that I saw that was like, ooh, freaky. You know, you've got like these voodoo little like sticks that they find throughout the movie, and then at the very end when they're in the house, you know, it's kind of a typical creepy abandoned house that's, you know, probably hasn't been used in 50, 60, however many years. But I don't know. This movie is, I've never seen a movie like it, right? And I have seen found footage movies in the past, right? Is District 9, would you consider that a found footage movie? I really love District 9. It's a fantastic film. I also really like Cloverfield. Cloverfield's amazing, but Cloverfield is quite the opposite of Blair Witch Project. But, you know, there's a lot of time spent where you don't see a thing. Like, you see nothing. It's just black. It's nighttime. She has the camera on, but she's, like, freaking out, and they're scared, and there's, you know, a lot of, you know, fear amongst the characters, and, like, it gets very intense. It does. I will admit that it is certainly a film where, honestly, I would say the tension amongst all of the characters at times, it's certainly something to behold. I wouldn't say it's quite infectious, but I definitely found myself like, okay, geez, because, you know, they have, you know, those old cameras or whatever, and sometimes whenever she screams, it's so like high pitched that it like distorts a little bit, you know? And I think it's subtle, but it's one of those things that kind of adds into the raw feel. And, you know, personally, and this is a small thing for just me personally, you know, especially at the beginning of the movie when they're just kind of like going around casually before they get into the woods, it kind of had that fun little like family home video type deal with it. And I kind of enjoyed that, because I remember my family used to have like tapes from like the 80s and 90s and early 2000s that we used to watch, and it kind of reminded me of something like that. And that's, you know, that's a little thing that doesn't really reflect much on the actual movie. But you know, the only scary things, in my opinion, outside of just the characters screaming at each other and, you know, kind of freaking out, is, you know, the voices in the background, especially towards the end of the movie, where there's like that guy that's like constantly screaming, and they believe it to be their friend who like vanished without a trace because he left all his stuff there. And one night he was there, and the other night he was gone. And also some of the little, like subtle, like children laughing and just like noise that they hear when they're like in their tent at night. And I gotta say, this, I feel like if I watched this in the theater, I feel like watching this in the theater in 1999 would be a whole different experience, because I can't even imagine, like sometimes it was hard to hear some of the like little disturbing or like creepy noises that they heard. And I had closed captioned on, so it would tell me like when there was like man shouting or agonizing shout, or, you know, rustling leaves or whatever, because I couldn't really hear it, because I'm just, you know, I'm just watching it on this TV right here. But I feel like the thing with this movie is it's like you kind of had to be there, you know? Now, obviously, I'm watching it in 2021. This movie has been debunked. I have heard tons of things about it. I've never seen it, but, you know, everybody was like, it's so overrated, it sucks, all this for a little camera shake. And I got to admit, you know, the fact that there really is no big payoff at the end kind of sucks. You know, I know there's sequels or whatever, and there was a remake a couple years ago, but I'm not really interested in that. I was just hoping that there was going to be a greater payoff, and there actually was. Because, like, towards the end, it does get pretty intense, and there's a lot of intense moments throughout this movie, and I do respect the fact that, you know, it's like a psychological thriller, because a lot of the intensity is manufactured by just the panic induced upon these characters. And, you know, it certainly plays on the fear of a lot of people, you know, not knowing what the hell is in the woods in these real rural areas. And, you know, in the dark, you don't know what the fuck's out there, right? So definitely that's a part of it that adds to the effective chill factor, if you will. But honestly, the ending, I think, was kind of stupid and it was kind of lame. It was really kind of confusing because it kept changing camera angles to, like, the two characters. But, like, regardless of whether you're not getting the woman's perspective or the guy's perspective, like, the girl was always, like, in the distance. Like, it's not like you couldn't get her point of view. You would get her, like, physical point of view, but, like, you'd hear her scream off, like, clearly in the distance, as if it was the guy's point of view the whole time. That was something that kind of bothered me. I don't really know why. It's not a big deal, but the ending, you know, it kind of sucks. It's not really anything that impressed me. However, as a whole, Blair Witch, it's really short. It's like an hour and 15 minutes. And personally, I didn't have a hard time sitting through it. I didn't think it was a painful watch. Although, you know, the build-up was certainly there. You know, really was hoping to see some more action that wasn't just characters screaming at each other and, like, the panicky point of view, whatever, because they kind of played it up to be way more than it actually was. And I was, like, really hoping once they got to the house that something was going to happen, but I kind of knew already that, you know, a lot of people dog this movie for just not having any action and it just kind of ending with, like, not even a cliffhanger, just, like, being really lame. And the last shot is really weird because the guy is just, like, you see his, like, camera fall or whatever, and then it cuts to her point of view, and then she, like, sees him, and he's just kind of, like, sitting there still. It's not like he's on the ground. He's, like, still. And then all of a sudden, like, her camera falls, and, like, the film shutters or whatever, and it just ends. But, you know, as I've said, like, 8 times already now, watching this back in the day, the mystique surrounding it, I'm sure it would be a much different and honestly a much better experience than me watching in 2021. But honestly, wasn't a real big fan. Found footage movies are cool. They're definitely unorthodox for film standards, and this is a movie this is like no other movie I've seen or talked about, or, you know, especially, I feel like it works for a horror film, obviously, but didn't really do it for me. I don't think I'd recommend this to a horror fan. I would be interested to see what other people think, because, like I said, and I feel like I repeat myself all the time when I ramble on about these movies, but the intensity between the characters is very much a strong point, and I feel like that could certainly have an effect on a lot of viewers. So I'll give it that. But I would recommend it. It's weird. This is something that I don't think I've ever done before when I'm talking about movies. I wouldn't recommend it to a horror fan because I don't think they'd enjoy it. But I would recommend it to... I'd recommend it to casuals, for sure. Although, in the end, I'm going to give it... I'm feeling a 2.5. A 2.5 out of 5. I think it's just okay. I think I would watch it again, but not because it was good. I feel like I'd want to watch it again with another person, like a friend or a girlfriend or something, or a group of people. Yeah, because I feel like they'd all have different perspectives on it. But not a big fan. But 2.5 out of 5. It's a one of a kind movie for sure.